On a sweltering summer night in 1847, 13 members of the wealthy Bogard family perished within hours inside their Grand Garden District mansion in New Orleans. Official records filed away in the Louisiana State Archives listed the cause as sudden fever, but notes scrawled in the margins suggest otherwise. Their physician, Dr. Armand Thibodeau, later confessed in his private journal that he had never witnessed anything so terrifying. The family's fingernails blackened, their tongues swelled a deep purple, and their agonized screams echoed through the halls until dawn. Even stranger, every single death struck exactly 90 minutes after the family's traditional Sunday supper. Only one person survived that night, Violet, the family's cook, who had prepared the doomed meal. For over 170 years, the Bogard tragedy has been whispered about, but never openly discussed, locked away in silence and shame. Tonight, we're going to unearth the truth behind that supper, the cook who lived, and why a powerful bloodline was erased in a single evening. If you love uncovering the hidden and the forgotten, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments what state you're listening from. We love connecting with mystery seekers across the country. To understand what happened, we have to step back into New Orleans of 1847, a city glittering with wealth but built on cruelty. In the Garden District, where Spanish moss hung like mourning veils over ornate balconies, mansions rose as monuments to fortunes carved from enslaved labor. Among them stood the Bogard estate, a 3-story Greek revival palace, with Corinthian columns piercing the Louisiana sky. Octave Bogard inherited the house and the family's sugar empire from his father, along with a reputation for what polite society called strict discipline, but what the enslaved knew as relentless brutality. At 43, Octave ruled his home and his plantation with an iron fist. His wife Celeste, a fragile Creole socialite, turned a blind eye to his cruelty, clinging to her place in society. Their children, Etienne, Margot Philippe, and little Amalie, had been raised to see the people who served them as objects, no different from the silver candlesticks on their dining table. The household also included Octave's brother Auguste, his wife Lucille, their twin sons Henri and Louis, Octave's aging mother, who still commanded authority, and Celeste's sharp-tongued spinster sister. Behind the grandeur lived 26 enslaved souls, each bearing the weight of chains, both visible and invisible. None carried that burden heavier than Violet. Born in the mansion's slave quarters in 1823, she lost her mother, also the family's cook, to exhaustion when she was just 14. Forced into the role, Violet quickly proved to have an extraordinary gift in the kitchen. But that gift would one day turn into something far darker. Violet's hands moved with an instinct that couldn't be taught, as if she had been born. Knowing how long to let a roux darken, which herbs would unlock hidden flavors, and just the right pinch of spice to turn ordinary ingredients into dishes that dazzled New Orleans society. Her skill in the kitchen made the Bogards the envy of their peers, but that talent came with a crushing weight few understood. She worked 18 hours a day, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast and collapsing long after midnight once the last dish was scrubbed clean. Her tiny room in the servants' quarters held nothing but a straw mattress, a spare dress, and a wooden cross once belonging to her mother. Despite her importance, Violet lived in a cruel paradox. She was tasked with creating meals worthy of royalty, yet forbidden from tasting a single bite. She judged every sauce by sight, every roast by smell, every dessert by instinct. Octave took particular delight in reminding her that while she crafted feasts for the powerful, she would spend her life eating scraps. To the other enslaved, Violet was both admired and pitied, respected for her rare skills and small privileges, yet pitied for the loneliness her role demanded. She was spared the whip and the cane fields, sometimes even given a cast-off dress, but her isolation was its own kind of punishment. Still, even within the mansion's rigid order, moments moments of quiet rebellion bloomed. Samuel, the stablemaster's son, had caught Violet's heart. At 28, with a steady strength and gentle resolve, he whispered of freedom and futures beyond Louisiana. They knew such dreams were dangerous and nearly impossible on a plantation. A man's body was valued in profit, not hope. But their stolen glances and late-night whispers carried a power stronger than chains. Old Moses, the butler, had long ago perfected the art of survival. His bowed back and graying hair hid a mind sharper than anyone guessed. He appeared with wine before it was called for and melted into the shadows when the family wanted privacy. To outsiders, his loyalty was legendary. But if one looked closely, they might catch the cold fire in his eyes, the quiet rebellion that never fully dimmed. Then there was Lily, only 16, serving Celeste and her daughters as a lady's maid. Her beauty made her a target of unwanted attention, forcing her to move like a ghost through the mansion, working flawlessly while trying to remain unseen. In the stables, Thomas Samuel's father carried the wisdom of survival. After burying wives and outlasting masters, he had mastered the art of masking his true thoughts, knowing that one wrong glance could cost him his life. The rhythm of the mansion was strict and unyielding: breakfast at 7, lunch at 1 each, gathering a display of wealth and power. But nothing compared to the Sunday suppers. Every week, the family gathered at 6 o'clock sharp beneath a glittering Parisian chandelier, seated at a table long enough to hold 20, laid with china, silver, and crystal that caught the candlelight like stars. For the Bogards, this was ritual business: paused appearances, perfected family ties put on display. For Violet, Sunday was her test and her triumph, the culmination of days spent gathering ingredients from the French market and crafting a 7-course feast that reflected the family's Creole heritage. From delicate soups to lavish desserts, each dish was both an act of labor and a reminder of the cruel divide between creator and consumer. At 5:30, the family gathered for cocktails, the men sipping brandy, the women cordials, while the children listened in silence to talk of plantations and gossip. At precisely 6, Moses would announce supper. The family filed in with the ceremony of a church procession. Octave sat at the head, Celeste at the far end, the children and relatives arranged by long-established hierarchy. Grandmother Bogard still held her place of honor at Octave's right, August at his left. Conversations flowed with rehearsed ease, each person performing their role in the show of harmony and wealth. But beneath the polished surface of silver and chandeliers, resentment simmered unseen like a pot on the edge of boiling over. By the spring of 1847, cracks had begun to spread through the Bogard empire. The previous year's sugar harvest had been ruined by floods, and now creditors were circling demanding payment. Octave couldn't easily provide. He had already sold parcels of land and whispered of the unthinkable, selling human lives to keep his books balanced. The pressure sharpened his temper into something unpredictable and dangerous. The enslaved learned to read him like a storm, the clenched jaw over a ledger, the clipped tone when giving orders, and worst of all, the cold glint in his eyes that signaled cruelty was coming. It was in this climate of fear that Violet and Samuel's bond deepened into something undeniable. The breaking point came on a blistering June afternoon. Violet was in the kitchen, arranging delicate canapes for Charleston guests, when she heard Samuel's voice cry out in the courtyard. She rushed to the window and froze. Samuel was on his knees, shirt ripped and bloodied, while Octave loomed over him, whip in hand. His face twisted with rage as he accused Samuel of daring to look at 17-year-old Margot with those eyes. Violet's stomach turned. She had seen Margot blush around Samuel, seen his discomfort, his careful efforts to avoid being alone with her. But on a plantation, refusal was never seen as protection. It was twisted into insolence, a crime worth blood. Samuel's pleas were cut short by another crack of leather across his back. Octave sneered that silence was guilt enough. When Violet could no longer bear it, she burst from the kitchen and flung herself between whip and man. Begging for Samuel's life, she stammered that he had done nothing wrong, that he worked hard, that he was good. Octave turned to her slowly, and what she saw in his eyes chilled her more than his shouting ever had. A calculating fury, deadly in its precision. His voice dropped to a whisper more frightening than rage as he mocked her for daring to question him, for imagining that her skill in the kitchen granted her the right to speak. She held her ground, trembling but firm. "Samuel is a good man," she said again, louder this time, the words steady despite the fear in her chest. Octave's laugh shattered the air, sharp as broken glass. "A good man," he spat. "He's property, girl. My property. And so are you." He leaned close, his breath heavy with brandy, his whisper venomous. "I think you've forgotten that." Samuel was dragged to the tack room, locked away without food or water, until he learned respect. For Violet, Octave designed a punishment that twisted both body and spirit. From that night forward, he declared she would continue to prepare meals, but would not eat until every member of the family pronounced themselves satisfied, and since he was never easily satisfied, she could expect to starve. The household understood the cruelty instantly. The next 3 days stretched into torment. Violet, faint with hunger, still crafted lavish feasts, her hands trembling as she kneaded dough, her blurred vision struggling to measure spices, her body weak beneath the weight of silver platters. Moses and Lily managed to sneak her scraps now and then, but it wasn't enough. Worse than her hollow stomach was the humiliation. Octave made a spectacle of her suffering, forcing her to serve each dish with bowed head, while the family picked apart her work, sending back plates with mocking complaints. Every bite they took became a weapon, every smirk a reminder of her powerlessness. Octave reveled in his cruelty, finding fault in every dish Violet placed before him. The soup was too salty, the meat too tough, the vegetables lifeless. Each criticism meant another day without food, and he took delight in savoring every bite, while describing its flavor in exaggerated detail, forcing her to watch. By the second day, Samuel, weak, desperate, and frantic with worry for her, managed to break free from the tack room. He staggered to the kitchen before Octave's men caught him. The beating that followed was so brutal that Dr. Armand Thibodeau was summoned not out of compassion, but to ensure Samuel survived long enough for Octave to continue his punishment. While tending Samuel's wounds, Thibodeau noticed something in Violet that unsettled him. Her body was thin, her cheeks hollow, but her eyes burned with a steady fire. Later that night, he confessed to his wife that he had seen that look before, the look of someone who had crossed beyond breaking. Most people shattered under cruelty, becoming empty shadows. But a dangerous few hardened, turning their suffering into focus, patience, and purpose. Violet, he warned, was one of them. He thought to caution Octave, but never did, pushing it aside until it was too late. On the third day of her torment, as Violet swayed on her feet, watching Octave theatrically praise her praline bread pudding, something inside her shifted. Hunger no longer dulled her senses, it sharpened them. She began to see the Bogard family differently, not as untouchable masters, but as a system of weaknesses and habits, a puzzle waiting to be solved. She noticed Octave's trembling hand when stress overtook him, proof that his financial situation was worse than anyone admitted. She saw Celeste's furtive glances at the brandy decanter, her quiet surrender to drink. She caught young Philippe watching Lily with eyes that carried dangerous intentions. She observed Grandmother Bogard's ritual of taking her medicine precisely 30 minutes before meals, August's obsessive pocket watch checks, and little Amelie's habit of saving her favorite food for last. Details once meaningless now became tools, the raw ingredients of a plan. That night, lying on her straw mattress, weak but unbroken, Violet reached her decision. She would continue to serve the family exactly as they expected, but with a difference. The same precision and mastery that made her meals famous would be applied to a far darker recipe. She would bide her time patient as the river, and when the moment came, she would serve the Bogards a supper that would end their reign forever. By July, as New Orleans simmered in relentless heat, Violet's mask was firmly in place. She moved with the quiet discipline of a perfect servant, never betraying the storm inside her. To the family, it seemed she had been broken and humbled by punishment, restored to her proper place. But those who knew her best sensed the shift. Old Moses, seasoned by decades of watching people survive under chains, saw that her movements had changed. Where once she cooked with the flowing grace of passion, she now worked with the cold, precise rhythm of machinery. Violet's gift in the kitchen, once a thing of awe and admiration, had sharpened into something unnervingly precise. She no longer relied only on instinct. Her senses had become weapons tuned to perfection. Samuel, battered but healing in the quarters, felt the change most keenly. The woman who had once carried warmth in her laughter and gentleness in her touch now moved with a focus so cold it chilled him. In the dim dawn, as she cleaned his wounds with steady hands, he caught a glimpse of her eyes, calm, sharp, and merciless, like a predator waiting for the strike. "Violet," he whispered one morning, his voice trembling. "You're scaring me. What's in your head, girl?" She paused in the doorway, her figure etched against the weak light seeping through the window. Turning back, her face was unreadable, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm going to take care of everything," she said. Samuel's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, take care of everything?" But she was gone before he could stop her, leaving him with the sickening certainty that the woman he loved was planning something that would change everything forever. To the Bogard family, nothing seemed amiss. If anything, they were delighted. They thought Octave's punishment had crushed Violet's spirit back into obedience, for her cooking now surpassed even her own high standards. The meals she set before them, dazzled presentations, more extravagant flavors, layered with stunning sophistication, details, executed with obsessive precision. They never realized the truth. Violet had begun a different kind of study, one far beyond cookery. On her trips to the French market, she wandered into corners, unnoticed by polite society, lingering at stalls run by herb sellers and medicine women who dealt in remedies not listed in apothecary books. Her questions were subtle, woven into casual conversation, but behind them lay darker purpose. New Orleans in 1847 was a city where medicine blurred with mysticism, where voodoo, Haitian tradition, and native knowledge mixed freely with European science. Remedies that healed in one measure could harm in another, and every plant carried two faces, one that cured, one that killed. Violet learned carefully, slowly, never drawing attention. She memorized which roots could mimic food poisoning, which herbs might stop a heart, which mushrooms could induce seizures or fevers no doctor could explain. More importantly, she learned that timing and dosage were the difference between discomfort and death. Her most valuable lessons came from Mama Brigitte, an ancient Creole woman tucked into the furthest corner of the market, her stall heavy with dried herbs and bundles of roots. Some whispered she had seen 90 summers. Others claimed she was older, stillborn free in Haiti before the revolution. To those who knew, her wisdom of plants was unmatched. She never asked why a cook slave sought such knowledge. Maybe she recognized desperation in Violet's eyes. Or maybe she simply believed that knowledge was a power everyone had a right to claim. Whatever her reasons, she shared secrets no respectable apothecary would utter aloud. "This root here," she would murmur, holding up a twisted shard of bark, "helped the stomach in small amounts." Too much, though, and it tear a person up inside. Make them sick fast. No doctor can save them. Violet listened, absorbed, remembered. She learned of herbs that strangled the breath leaves that could slow a pulse until it faltered powders that brought on fits mistaken for sudden fever. She did not flinch, did not hesitate. Every word was tucked away, another ingredient for the recipe she was building in silence. Mama Brigitte had not only given Violet recipes for roots and herbs, but a deeper lesson in patience, precision, and power. She explained how the body absorbed toxins, how long symptoms took to appear, and how to tailor doses to a person's age, weight, and constitution. For Violet, it was like learning a new language, one where every dish carried the possibility of control, of punishment, of justice. Through the long summer, she tested her knowledge in ways so subtle the family never noticed. A pinch of one root left August clutching his stomach in mild discomfort. A trace of another herb made young Philippe complain of nausea. Celeste's queasy spells were chalked up to the humidity, and Dr. Thibodeau dismissed them with a tonic and gentle scolding about rich food. Even little Amalie's bouts of weakness were attributed to the Louisiana heat. Meanwhile, Violet's isolation deepened. Once she had been a quiet source of comfort for Lily, a daughter figure to Moses, and a steady presence among the staff. Now she drifted away, her warmth hidden behind a mask of cool detachment. Lily's timid confessions were met with polite distance. Moses sensed the shift too, the same unease he'd once felt around dangerous animals, quiet on the surface, but coiled with potential violence. Even Thomas grew wary, though he said nothing. Only Samuel glimpsed the truth, and even he was shut out. In rare moments together, he begged her to explain what was happening inside her. "You're changing, Violet," he whispered one heavy August night as they sat in the garden, their voices hushed against the drone of crickets. She tilted her head toward the stars, her voice low and steady. "They took everything from me. My mama, my childhood, my freedom. And when I finally found something worth holding on to, they beat you and starved me for their amusement." Samuel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "That don't mean you got to turn into them," he pleaded. Violet's reply was calm, chilling. "I'm not turning into them. They destroy for pleasure. I'll destroy because it's necessary." Samuel's chest tightened. "What are you planning?" She looked at him then, and he saw a stillness in her eyes, more terrifying than rage, a kind of peace that came only from certainty. "I'm going to serve them exactly what they deserve," she said. Nothing more, nothing less. By September, her plan was complete. She knew the family's habits as intimately as her own heartbeat. She had tested the herbs, studied reactions, and refined her methods until there was no guesswork left. All she needed was the right moment. That moment came with Octave's announcement of a grand Sunday supper to celebrate the harvest. Against all odds, the sugar crop had been strong, debts were cleared, and Octave's pride restored. This was to be a feast not only for family, but for Louisiana's elite judges, bankers, merchants, all seated beneath the glittering Parisian chandelier. Octave declared it would be a supper New Orleans would never forget. In that boast, he was more right than he could ever imagine. The supper Octave planned was meant to be a triumph, a glittering spectacle that would announce to the city that the Bogards had weathered hardship and emerged stronger than ever. The guest list gleamed with power: Judge Honoré Dufresne and his wife banker, Edouard Blanchard merchant Ali Boudreau, even Mayor Augustus Chouteau. Reverend Father Antoine Marini would bless the meal, while Dr. Armand Thibodeau would attend not just as physician, but as Octave's old friend. In total, 23 of New Orleans' most prominent citizens would sit beside the 13 members of the Bogard family beneath the glittering chandelier. It was meant to be a night of celebration and excess. For Violet, it was the stage she had been waiting for. Octave had insisted that every enslaved servant remain in the mansion that night, ready to attend to the needs of the elite. That decision sealed his fate. It meant that every soul who had watched her humiliation would be present when she delivered her reckoning. In the days before the feast, Violet's intensity was startling, even to those who thought they knew her. She haunted the French market with the precision of a jeweler selecting gems. Tomatoes were weighed in her palm for ripeness, cuts of meat scrutinized for marbling herbs, sniffed and tested for strength. Nothing was left to chance. Her menu was nothing short of a masterpiece. It would begin with turtle soup seasoned to perfection, designed to open the appetite and sharpen anticipation. Then pompano bathed in a sauce so intricate it demanded hours of attention. After that came squabs stuffed with rice and vegetables, a dish handed down through generations, but altered with Violet's own secret additions. The meat courses, beef and pork prepared in lavish styles, would be paired with vegetables from the garden and bread crafted to the ideal rise. And finally, the jewel of the evening, her praline bread pudding draped in custard, the dish that had made her reputation. What the guests would never realize was that every course was more than food. It was calculation. Violet had spent months preparing a different recipe, one crafted from knowledge, whispered in the shadows of the market stalls. Her final visit to Mama Brigitte came on Friday. The old woman wrapped the last herbs in brown paper, her eyes heavy with something like grief. "You sure about this path, child?" she asked. "Once you start, there ain't no turning back." Violet met her gaze with steady resolve. "I'm already too far down the road." They made sure of that. Mama Brigitte pressed the package into her hand, her voice low. "Then may God have mercy on your souls, because none of you will find it anywhere else." All weekend, Violet worked in the kitchen with a precision that unsettled even the other enslaved servants. She moved like a clockmaker, setting the gears of some intricate device, every action measured, every gesture deliberate. By Sunday, it was as though the feast had become more than a meal. It was a ritual, and Violet, its high priestess. By the time the October sun rose over the garden district, the Bogard mansion throbbed with nervous anticipation. Guests of wealth and power would soon arrive, and Octave demanded perfection. Violet moved through the kitchen like a conductor guiding an orchestra, but her silence unsettled those around her. She no longer hummed as she worked. Instead, the only sounds were the scrape of knives across whetstones and the steady rhythm of her chopping, slicing, and stirring. Samuel, limping but mobile, hovered at the edges of her world. He found excuses to pass through the kitchen, each time watching her with growing dread. The woman who had once filled his life with warmth now worked with a cold detachment, polishing her knives as though each blade was a sacred tool. On Saturday evening, he could no longer hold his tongue. With the kitchen empty except for them, he whispered, "Violet, I'm begging you, don't do this. There has to be another way." She didn't look up at first, only paused in her cleaning, the steel catching the lantern light. Another way to what Samuel freedom justice. When she finally met his gaze, her eyes were steady, unflinching. "You think there's justice for people like us? You think if we wait, pray, work harder, someone will come and set things right?" Samuel's voice cracked. "If you go through with this, you'll destroy yourself too." She set the knife down, turning toward him fully. "I've already been destroyed. The only choice left is whether I die alone or take them with me." For the first time in weeks, her mask slipped. Samuel glimpsed the woman he loved, but only for an instant. Then she was gone again, locked away behind that terrifying calm. "If you love me," she said softly, "find a way not to be here tomorrow night." He stared at her, his throat dry. "Dear God, Violet, what have you done?" She turned back to her knives, dismissing him without a word. He knew then that the moment to change her path had passed long ago. When dawn broke on Sunday, October 3rd, the mansion came alive with frantic energy. Servants scurried through the halls, polishing silver and arranging flowers, while cooks bustled around Violet as if she were a general before battle. But this day, Violet tolerated no interference. The sauces, the seasonings, the most delicate elements of the feast, she guarded them fiercely, refusing even the smallest help. Her precision bordered on obsession. Each ingredient was measured, each step rehearsed in her mind until it was second nature. Old Moses, ever watchful, noticed her behavior and muttered to Lily, "Girl's got ears like a cat today. Stranger than I ever seen her." Lily, tense from her own duties, only nodded. Neither of them realized Violet's vigilance had purpose. She wasn't just cooking, she was tracking. Every footstep, every voice in the mansion told her where people were and when. Timing was everything. She needed the courses to arrive at exact intervals, each bite swallowed in the order she intended. This supper wasn't just a celebration, it was a performance. And Violet had prepared her stage so carefully that by nightfall, when the guests took their seats beneath the glittering chandelier, the gears of her terrible design would already be turning. By late afternoon, the Bogard mansion glowed like a jewel box, every detail polished to perfection. Fresh flowers filled the air with perfume, and the chandeliers sparkled against mirrors and silver. The dining table stretched like an altar beneath the weight of Limoges china, Irish linen, and sterling cutlery that shimmered like captured starlight. Upstairs, the family prepared themselves as though for a coronation. Celeste sat for hours, while Lily twisted and pinned her hair into a tower of curls, stiff with pomade. Grandmother Bourard, regaled despite her frailty, insisted on her black silk gown and the emeralds that had marked 3 generations of wealth. The men clustered in Octave's study, brandy in hand, boasting of harvests and politics, while August flushed and triumphant crowed about his cunning business dealings. The children, stiff in new suits and pressed dresses, were drilled on their roles to be seen, admired, and silent. Guests arrived in a steady parade, their carriages lined like trophies along the drive. Judge Dufresne and his wife swept in first, followed by banker Blanchard and his striking daughter Celestine, her beauty and dowry already fodder for whispers. Dr. Thibodeau arrived with his ever-present medical bag, offering polite hopes that his skills wouldn't be needed on such a fine evening. Then came the mayor, Augustus Shuto, whiskered and broad, his booming congratulations and speeches filling the room with pomp. Each arrival layered the air with laughter, pride, and the clinking of glasses. Amid this swirl of celebration, Violet moved with deadly purpose. The disruption of routine, the very chaos of hosting so many prominent guests was her cover. While all eyes were turned to greetings and gossip, she made her final adjustments. With the calm precision of a chemist, she measured powders and extracts into sauces, stews, and desserts. Each addition matched to her knowledge of a specific diner's constitution. Nothing was random. The doses were too small to stand out on their own, but when combined across courses, they formed a design as exact as clockwork. Timing was everything. Symptoms would build gradually, masked by the warmth of wine and the heaviness of rich food, until they reached their peak together. By then, help would be impossible. As the clock struck 6, the parlors swelled with conversation and music. Glasses were raised, cigars lit, and Octave held court in the center, flushed with pride, his every word heavy with triumph. To his guests, it was a night of victory. To Violet, watching from the doorway with steady eyes, it was the prologue to a reckoning. Every face in that room, every cruel hand, every turned eye, Every smug beneficiary of her suffering was about to take their place in the final feast she had been preparing all summer. At precisely 6 o'clock, the ritual began. Old Moses appeared in the parlor doorway, bowing low, his voice resonant and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, supper is served." The gathering shifted like a well-rehearsed play. Octave strode forward with Mayor Shuto at his side. Celeste followed on the arm of Judge Dufresne, and the others arranged themselves according to rank and tradition. Grandmother Berard, draped in her emeralds, leaned heavily on young Etienne's arm. But her place of honor at Octave's right hand was never in question. The dining room glittered like a temple to wealth. Dozens of candles bathed the table in golden light. Crystal glasses refracted it into shards of brilliance, and the fine china gleamed against linen, so white it seemed to glow. The air itself was thick with the aroma of Violet's cooking rich broths, herbs, and roasting meats that promised a feast beyond compare. The company settled into their seats with eager anticipation. Octave, flushed with pride, had spent the entire week boasting of Violet's genius, and tonight she was expected to outdo even herself. Even Dr. Thibodeau, who had dined in the salons of Paris, felt genuine curiosity at what awaited. Violet, however, did not stand in the doorway to bask in their praise. She remained in the shadows of the kitchen, orchestrating the meal with Moses and the other servants. In the past, she might have taken satisfaction in the applause each dish received. But tonight her eyes were detached, clinical, as though she were watching the results of a long experiment unfold. The first course, delicate turtle soup, was met with rapture. Judge Dufresne declared it a triumph of flavor, while banker Blanchard insisted it surpassed anything he had tasted in Paris. Even the ever-critical matriarch inclined her head in approval. No one suspected that within the rich broth lay the first thread of Violet's invisible design. The herbs she had chosen would work slowly, absorbed harmlessly at first, but building toward a crescendo when combined with what was yet to come. The pompano arrived next, gleaming beneath its elaborate sauce. Mayor Shuto, famous for his gluttony, rolled his eyes heavenward and proclaimed it fit for the gods. Octave beamed with pride, promising the mayor he would secure the recipe from his talented cook. The guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the celebration swelled with each bite. But Violet, watching closely, saw the first cracks forming. August's fork slowed between mouthfuls, his appetite uncharacteristically restrained. Celeste pressed her hand lightly to her stomach, masking discomfort behind a brittle smile. Philippe flushed red in the cheeks, his excitement easily mistaken for the thrill of dining among luminaries. To the casual eye, the feast was a triumph. To Violet's, it was a performance moving toward its climax. The meat courses emerged with theatrical flourish, earning gasps from the guests. The beef was tender and rich, its flavors layered with meticulous artistry. The pork, paired with unexpected spices, drew astonishment from seasoned palates. Compliments showered the Bogards, each word a knife turned in Violet's heart. Every toast, every laugh, every clink of silver on china carried her closer to the moment she had been building toward for months. The feast that had begun in triumph unraveled with terrifying speed. Dr. Thibodeau, ever observant, had noticed hints of strain earlier in the meal. Grandmother Borard's difficulty swallowing Henri's inexplicable sweating Blanchard's forced energy. But in the glow of candlelight and laughter, these details had seemed trivial. Only now, with dessert plates barely cleared and brandy glasses half raised, did those subtle warnings reveal themselves as the opening notes of disaster. Violet's bread pudding, flawless in texture and sweetness, was the final act of her performance. Guests praised it with near ecstatic delight, Mayor Shuto proclaiming it the greatest dessert in Louisiana, Judge Dufresne suggesting her talents belonged in royal kitchens. Octave swelled with pride, raising his glass to toast the finest cook in all of Louisiana, whose talents have made this evening a triumph to be remembered for years. His words meant as flattery rang instead as prophecy. The first collapse came suddenly. August, mid-laugh, clutched his throat, his face twisting in confusion before he could finish his story. Celeste's fan clattered to the floor as her hands began to shake uncontrollably, the color draining from her cheeks. Dr. Thibodeau rose sharply, his physician's instincts cutting through the haze of wine. "Something's wrong," he said, even as his own stomach turned violently inside him. Within minutes, the dining room descended into chaos. Gros Berard, her frail body unable to resist the onslaught, toppled from her chair, shattering her crystal glass in a spray of glittering shards. Little Amelie's cries for her mother grew thin and pitiful as her small frame convulsed her white dress, dampened by sweat and sickness. She suffered quickly, her body burning through the poison faster than the adults, her torment brief but unbearable to witness. Mayor Shudo, stripped of dignity, clawed across the floor toward the door, leaving behind a trail of vomit as his body struggled in vain to expel the toxins, shutting down his organs. Banker Blanchard slumped sideways in his chair, lips blue, breath shallow. Henri and Louis cried out in confusion before doubling over, their young bodies racked with pain. Dr. Thibodeau, fighting against his own failing strength, tried desperately to help, moving from one victim to another. But his blurred vision and trembling hands betrayed him. The poisons were too complex, too carefully blended, overwhelming every system at once. "Get help," he rasped to Moses, who stood frozen in the doorway, paralyzed by the horror. Send for. His words broke off as his knees buckled beneath him. The once regal dining hall, filled minutes earlier with laughter and applause, had become a chamber of screams, retching and collapsing bodies. Glass-shattered chairs toppled, and the scent of spiced meats and custard was replaced by the stench of sickness and fear. And through it all, Violet stood in the shadows just beyond the doorway, her face calm, her dark eyes fixed on the spectacle. She had prepared every moment of this evening with precision, and now she watched it unfold. Exactly as she had planned, a symphony of agony played out under the crystal chandelier. Dr. Thibodeau's final words dissolved into silence as agony bent him double, and in that moment of blinding pain, he understood the truth. Help would never come in time. The Bogards and their illustrious guests were already doomed. In the kitchen, Violet stood unmoving, her body rigid, but her face streaked with tears. They were not tears of sorrow nor of regret, but tears of release, as if years of suffering had finally been poured into one terrible act of justice. The screams from the dining hall rose and fell like a storm until even they began to fade. Samuel found her there, rooted in the place where she had spent her life feeding those who had owned her. He had tried to obey her plea to stay away, but his love had bound him too tightly to leave. Now, seeing the wet shine on her cheeks and hearing the echoes of death around them, he understood the magnitude of what she had done. "Violet," he whispered, his voice ragged, his hands trembling with grief rather than poison, "what have you done?" She turned to him slowly, and for a fleeting second, he saw something familiar in her gaze, the shadow of the woman he had once known. But it was only a ghost. That woman was gone, replaced by a figure forged in fire and cruelty, shaped into something cold and resolute. "I served them exactly what they deserved," she said softly, her voice almost drowned by the dying cries from the dining room. Nothing more, nothing less. By midnight, silence blanketed the mansion. The crystal glasses, the linen, the glittering chandelier, all stood unchanged, while around them lay bodies twisted in their final agony. The only sounds were the hushed prayers of the surviving enslaved and the scratch of Dr. Thibodeau's pen as he forced himself to complete the official paperwork. He alone had lived, though even he could not explain why. Perhaps his modest appetite had spared him larger doses. Perhaps years of medical practice and exposure to tinctures had given him a strange resistance. Whatever the reason, he would carry the memory with him, always. The official records still buried in the Louisiana State Archives listed the cause as sudden fever of unknown origin. Tobito knew better, but he also knew the truth would serve no one. To expose what had happened would bring scandal, panic, and ruin upon the city's most powerful families. And in truth, Violet's design had been so meticulous, her poisons drawn from roots, herbs, and fungi, so common, that no physician of the time could have proved deliberate murder. In the weeks that followed, the Bogard tragedy was whispered about in hushed tones. The family estate, stripped of heirs, was seized by creditors and sold off piece by piece. The once grand mansion stood empty for nearly a decade, a haunted monument to excess and silence, before being bought by a northern speculator who knew nothing of the horrors that had taken place under its roof. The enslaved household was scattered like leaves in the wind. Families were torn apart, names struck from records, lives sold to the highest bidder. Old Moses and Thomas were purchased by masters who valued their years of skill. Lily, still only 16, vanished into the vast human marketplace that fed the plantations of the Deep South. Samuel endured just long enough to be sent to a cotton plantation in Mississippi. 2 years later, he was dead, crushed beneath a wagon in an accident whispered by some to be no accident at all. And Violet. No official record tells of her fate. Her name is not written in the archives, nor does any sale ledger bear her mark. Some say she disappeared into the night after the massacre, slipping into the free black communities of New Orleans. Others claim she was buried in an unmarked grave outside the city, her body discarded like refuse. What remains certain is this: on that October night in 1847, one enslaved cook erased an entire bloodline and shook the foundations of New Orleans' most powerful families. The Bogards were remembered only in whispers, and Violet's name became a ghost story told in kitchens and quarters for generations. Those who remembered Samuel said that the whip scars on his back were nothing compared to the wounds left on his spirit. After Violet's final supper, he carried a kind of emptiness that never healed. And when death came for him only a few years later, he seemed almost to embrace it. Violet herself slipped into legend. The official records fall silent, as though she had been erased from history the moment the last candle guttered out in the Bogard dining room. Some say she was sold in the confusion that followed, sent to a remote parish plantation, where she died nameless and forgotten. Others whisper she escaped altogether, finding her way north to freedom in Canada. But the most enduring tale, the one still passed quietly through New Orleans' Creole communities, claims Violet never ran, never hid. She simply walked away. On that October night, while the mansion groaned with death, she melted into the streets of the French Quarter, taking nothing but her skill. In this version, Violet lived under another name, feeding the city's poor with the same mastery she had once given to the rich, finding a kind of redemption in serving those who had nothing. Dr. Thibodeau never spoke publicly of what he saw, but his private journal, discovered by his descendants more than a century later, revealed both horror and reluctant admiration. In his careful hand, he wrote that Violet had not been born a killer, but had been remade by suffering into something sharper than steel. She was driven to become what she never wished to be. One entry reads, by circumstances that would have broken most souls long before they broke her. If blame is to be given, it belongs not to her alone, but to all of us who sustained the system that forced her hand. The mansion itself lingered like a scar upon the city. When it was reoccupied in the 1850s, strange stories began almost immediately. Dinner guests fell mysteriously ill. Servants swore they smelled bitter herbs burning in the kitchen where no fire was lit. More than one cook quit after claiming to see a young black woman standing silently by the stove in the gray hours before dawn. These stories stitched together with the whispered truth of the Bogards' demise soon gave the house a reputation as one of New Orleans' most haunted places. Owners came and went. Few lasted more than a year. During the Civil War, Union soldiers turned the mansion into a hospital. Records from that time mention patients struck by sudden, inexplicable illnesses, leading to rumors that whatever force had claimed the Bogards still lingered in those walls. In the 1880s, a historical society tried to restore the estate as a monument to antebellum grandeur. Their work was plagued with accidents, collapsing scaffolds, sudden fevers among the crew, unexplained fires. Eventually, they abandoned the project. In 1894, the mansion was demolished at last. Newspaper accounts reported that while most of the structure had rotted, the kitchen remained eerily intact, as though preserved by an unseen hand. To this day, old New Orleans families will tell you that the spirit of Violet never left that room, that she still stirs. Unseen pots, her presence heavy in the air, a reminder of the night when justice was served not in a courtroom, but at a dinner table. The site where the Bogard mansion once stood is now a small city park, a patch of green tucked into the heart of New Orleans. Yet even without walls or chandeliers, the ground carries whispers. Visitors have reported sudden waves of illness during picnics and festivals, the phantom smell of food cooking where no kitchens exist, and fleeting glimpses of a young black woman in antebellum dress drifting through the mist at dawn. Whether ghost or memory, Violet lingers. But perhaps her truest legacy is not in the ghost stories that cling to the place, but in the human story beneath them. The Bogard tragedy is a reminder of the dual capacity within people, the cruelty to exploit and the strength to resist. Slavery thrived on the belief that human beings could be reduced to property, that their voices could be silenced, and that their pain could be dismissed indefinitely. Violet's story proves that no system built on such foundations can stand forever. Sooner or later, the very cruelty that sustains oppression becomes the spark that destroys it. The 13 Bogards who died that October night were not villains in the fairy tale sense. They were products of a society that normalized brutality and taught them to see others as less than human. Yet their complicity in that system sealed their fate. Violet's act of vengeance was both understandable and understandable, because of the years of torment she endured, tragic, because it transformed a gifted woman whose joy was once in feeding and nourishing into someone who found purpose in destruction. She did not set out to be a killer. The world shaped her into one. In the end, the haunting that remains is not of rattling chains or ghostly footsteps, but of a collective conscience. The Bogard mansion was never truly haunted by Violet. It was haunted by the guilt of an entire society that profited from human bondage. Her story forces us to confront the truth. The most enduring horrors are not supernatural at all, but born of human choices, human systems, and human cruelty. So what do you think? Was justice truly served that night, or did Violet's vengeance carry her too far into the darkness? Could such meticulous revenge have unfolded exactly as the legends say? Or is part of this tale shaped by myth and retelling? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about whether Violet's supper was justice or something even more terrifying. If you found yourself drawn into this story, make sure you're subscribed and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter we uncover. America's darkest histories are full of forgotten horrors and hidden truths, and together we'll keep bringing them into the light. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.